Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to our noontime lecture. Wow, this is quite a crowd. We're very excited. My name is Chuck Smythe. I'm the director of the Culture and History Department here at Sealaska Heritage Institute, and I'm very happy we have a guest who actually called us and asked us to collaborate on this wonderful talk today, this lecture. So Jim Simard, who's head of the historical collections at the Alaska State Library. Do you want to?
Well, I'm happy to see so many people here. It's been a pleasure for us and a real valuable resource to work with Dr. Guidon, who's, well, I think Chuck will do the introduction, but she's been working with Dr. de Laguna for a long time and is responsible for getting the photographic material and the documentation for it into the State Library. So she's been kind enough to working with us now about the documentation. So it's been wonderful to know her personally as well.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Marie-Françoise Guidon is a professor of anthropology at the Department of Religious Study at the University of Ottawa. Prior to moving to Ottawa, she was professor of anthropology at the University of British Columbia for at least 12 years and maybe longer. But she's conducted fieldwork in Alaska and Canada among the Otna, the Copper River Valley, the Upper Tanana people, the Inuit, and the Tsimshian, and she's going to tell us more about other places she's been. She was a student of Freddie de Laguna at Bryn Mawr, with whom she did fieldwork in Yakutat, and has written numerous articles published in the U.S. and Canada. Her dissertation was published by the National Museum of Canada as People of Tetlin, Why Are You Singing? And it's gone through 9 editions, so that's very exciting. She's also published The Dream in the Forest, about northern Athabascan shamanism, medicine, and the dream powers of elders known as dreamers. We're very pleased to have you here, and who will be speaking about her work with Freddie and also about her work around the world on matrilineal societies.
Thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure and a lot of excitement for me to talk about Freddie, who is, if you want, my intellectual mother. I have a great mother, but Freddie really shaped me. And working with her was a great, a magnificent gift, but it was also a challenge. So I am going to explain Freddie's methods and Freddie's field work and the teaching that goes with it. Because if you want to consult the archives, you have to know how the whole thing was brought together. When I first met Freddie as a young PhD student, I didn't know what to expect too much. She asked me, okay, what have you done until now? And I said, well, you mean what I have studied? And she said, yes. So I explained I had studied Africa, African cultures, some African languages, She said, but you haven't done African archaeology. I said, no. And I explained about studying North American Native people, South American Native people. She said, you haven't done South American archaeology, have you? I said, no. Then she said, what about the rest of the world? So I explained about kinship studies in Asia and so forth. So I had a well-rounded anthropological education. I thought I had demography, linguistics, and so on. I said, good. Now, for your PhD, she said, we are going to study everything you haven't studied till now. That was my program. And by the time I got my PhD, it just took 3 years. She pushed me, push. And she said, I have only one regret. We haven't done Pacific Island kinships. But that's how a mind worked. not from bits and pieces, but from a general overview. And she said, you cannot do anthropology until and unless you know the context, which meant the whole context. You had to know the botany of the area. You had to figure out the geological formation of the land. You had to figure out where the local people stood as far as languages are concerned, linguistic families, how did they get there? And she always pushed to bring together linguistics, cultural ethnography, archaeology, and all the other sciences, because to her, anthropology was real only insofar as it was a crossroad. But not a crossroad of generalized statements, not a crossroad of impression. It was a crossroad of sciences. So the methodological principles to her were almost absolute. There was nothing you could invent. There was nothing you could suppose. Everything had to be supported. And whenever you wanted, it was okay to suppose, but it has to be written down that you were supposing. It was okay to have conclusions, but you have to write down how you got to those conclusions and why they were always temporary. Freddie's parents were both philosophers. They taught at Bryn Mawr College. And Freddie had kept from them the rigor of philosophical argumentation. And she paid a great deal of attention to how you got to the ideas you were expressing. Self-reflexivity for her was not just a quality, it was a duty. Now, it also meant that science has to be respected for what it was. She was a scientist. She presented herself as a scientist, but a scientist, a real one, not like the wishy-washy one today, she would say, because you had to support everything you said, and you had to bring to it ethics, and I'll come back to that, but also a great rigor. So where other people would be satisfied in visiting, for instance, a family or a village or a site, and then coming back and writing it down in the tent on the hotel, Freddie evolved very rapidly. And I think even before she started working with Carl Beacon-Smith on the EAC, a schedule of research, which she imposed on every one of her students and field assistants, while on the field, or while in a library anywhere, or while actually anywhere. You had to travel with a notebook, and everything went into that notebook. Not just what you were learning, but how you were learning it. So you had to write down the questions you were asking, and sometimes why you were asking the questions. Then you would write the answers. And every page of the notebook had to have the date, the place, the event, the hour, and whatever happened. Dog barking, that goes in the text. Somebody knocking at the door, that goes in the text. You learn to write very fast. But the questions and the answer, and the question or your reaction and the answer, so that when you come back at night to your hotel or your cabin or your tent, then you get the little typewriters, and then you start typing the whole day, notes. And she loved working with assistants or with companions, because then you can check against each other, you know, especially for anything having to do with linguistics. Is that exactly how you heard it? And how are you going to spell that? And then you check again. And if you don't know, the next day you go back and you ask again. So you have what emerges from the process is another notebook, a typed one, if you have a typewriter, or a set of proper notes with everything in order. Then you make 4 copies. Well, these days, we didn't have Xerox machines, and didn't have computers or anything like that. So it was all done by hand and with carbon copies. So the last carbon copy is a little bit difficult to read, but you keep that. You sent one of the copies back to the institution you work from. That's to be kept as reference. Then you keep one full one for yourself as reference. Then you start, when you go back to your office or to university, you start cutting the 2 remaining copies, one according to people, that is, who made that statement. So at the end, you have a book of all the stuff that was said by Joe David. You have everything that was told you by Jesse David. You have, and so forth, okay? Then the last bit, you cut according to theme. And every paragraph is, again, identified by place, name of the participants, because you don't have time to write the name. So you have at the top of the page the initial for every person that's present. And then you start putting things. Once everything is identified, you notice that some items would belong to 3 or 4 different themes. Okay, you have moose hunting from a canoe, that goes into moose hunting, and that goes into canoe, okay? And there's also one going because that was told you by Bill Joe, okay? And by now you have a pretty good idea of how things work, theme by theme. And that's how you are going to construct your monograph, or your report, or your archaeological report. You get it? Okay. It's tricky at first, and it's a lot of work when you're in the field, but you realize quickly when you are back that it saves you a lot of time. You know exactly what to say, and you don't have to invent anything. You never do, because and one last detail, Freddie would never omit an information because it would contradict somebody else or it would contradict another statement. She would put them both. Yep. So it was a series of principles she would maintain to the end of her life. And when she was 98, she was still raging against the AAA because they were splitting anthropology into separate parts that would not talk to each other anymore. To her, you had to maintain a dialogue between archaeology and hunting. You have to maintain a dialogue between hunting and biology, between the fauna specialists and the linguistics, the linguists, and so on. Okay? Because where a lot of my present-day colleagues see culture as a set of elements or aspects or things, Freddie saw culture as a life. Okay? Not as a pie to be cut into pieces. The distinctions we made between different aspects of culture. So you compare that to making drawers and putting things in a drawer. But that's not culture. Culture is not even in the artifacts or the piece of information. Culture is what holds the whole thing together, which is a different order of things. Okay. Anthropology, to her, was precious, one of the most precious of all sciences, because it had to do with people. Now, today we tend to get edgy about the fact that you have science working with people, and how are you going to be objective about the scientific process if you are working with people with their own minds, and you have to respect them and so on. But for Freddie, respect was not something that grew out of prescriptions by science or by other institutions. Respect was innate. It was part of being a person, and you couldn't be a person without recognizing that the people around you were also persons. And she and Irving Hallowell, I don't know if anyone knows Irving Hallowell here. He was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, but he was also a dear friend of Freddie. And I still remember Hallowell, he was 80 at the time, teaching at Bryn Mawr and telling us, how can you assume you are a self unless you grant the same privilege to the living being around you? Okay, for Freddie that was obvious. Now, working with people meant that I've never seen her working with anyone, including children, okay, as less than an equal. I think she would have fired any student who would not have demonstrated the same attitude. You didn't respect people because it was scientific to do so or because it was ethic to do so. You respected people because you were a people yourself. Actually, she extended the same courtesy to animals. And it was really neat to see her with dogs, with ravens, with squirrels. But working with people had its demands. And the demands actually is going to bring me to that project later on. But it meant that you had to strive in as much as possible to serve the society you were studying. All the academic considerations would come after. Anything, all the demands of a profession would come later. You serve, first of all, the people you work with. And to Freddie, the rapport she had with people was immediate. They were a family. They were people she communicated with. And to her, a community is a bunch of people who communicate with each other. But you don't have to love them. But you have to communicate with them. And the communication always went both ways. Now, it doesn't mean that Freddie merged with the community she was studying, except maybe in Yakutat. Yakutat was too precious, too much a part of her. But otherwise, when in the field, she instructed me to bring detective novels or books that had nothing to do with the Copper River or the Atna or the Tanana River, so that after we had typed all the things, then I should read about Hercule Poirot and things like that, so as to get my mind clear and free for the next day. It was partly, I think, a way for her to help me get rid of preconceived ideas or early conclusions, to be open all the time. But it was also a way of retreating back into herself. She was the most private person I've ever met, with the exception of my sister, but they are very much like each other. She very, very rarely talked about herself. That was protected. That was precious. paradoxically, that allowed her to extend the same protection to the people she worked with. So she would not push people. She told me that she regretted, when she was 98, she regretted not having asked questions in Yakutat in the 50s and 60s, questions about the Second World War and what had happened during the war to Yakutat and to other communities. But she said it was too painful for her, and therefore she assumed it was too painful for the people around her. So there is a big gap, she said. But well, no, Freddie, no, I cannot do that either. But she had that kind of sensibility. She also did not know in the 60s and the 70s how to bring the actual identity of her informants to the forefront. So she kept it hidden. It's in her field notes, though. And when she was almost ready to die, she said, make sure that everybody has access to the names of the informants, the names of the people who knew, so that you know where the information came from and you can praise those people who worked so hard. However, it would have been impossible for me to connect the information with the people when we re-edited the book. We had to manage with what we had at the time. But the information is there. And so for the ATNA, she said, make sure all the names are in. There's also the problem for her that in the 70s, anthropologists in general were not supposed to identify the informants. And so it would have been really hard to push against the grain and ask the Smithsonian Institution that published the book, the 3 volumes, to follow her wishes. So she went with the flow, and at least that was being published. But she was really chafing at the rules there. There was something that were not satisfying. Though Freddie was the most determined and the most, how should I put it? She had a will of iron. She had to in the beginning, because when she started, you know, she was just past 21, and a woman, and there she was traipsing in the Arctic by herself with men, and she had to contend with all those captains of boats wondering what to do with a strange girl because she didn't look like a woman. But I'll tell you a story about that. We were in Copper Center. We were working around Chistochina and places like that, up the Copper River Valley. And we had to cross a certain number of rivers. And I said to Freddie, I don't know whether we should go to the fish camps today because the rivers are going swollen by rain. She looked at the sky. It was pelting down. She said, well, no, it's not real rain. It's just a little bit of water. We'll go. I said, Freddie, I'm not sure. No, and if it rains, it's going to stop. So we would go, and that happened, you know, regularly. We would go and then try and see. Well, that day we got stuck in the river, of course. So she had me cut branches and everything so we could bring them under the wheel of the car stuck in the mud in the bottom of the slough, and then push and so on. We got out, and she said, you see, it was easy. But nothing could resist her, not even the weather. When she realized that she was not going to be able to finish her work, then determination was no longer enough. And she had to use another one of those qualities of her, and that's intelligence. She didn't like stupidity. She could stand just watching the world go by. Something had to be done. So she drew a list of all the things I had to do. And then she enlisted my students and some of my colleagues, and then said, okay, there. First of all, you reprint Monsanto Elias. All 3 volumes? Yes, and those are the changes I want you to make. Then she organized the work so that we would have access to a press, because the editor, she had endless battles with editors. And they were trying to accommodate her, but it's not easy. You know, if you have a university press, University of Washington press, and so on, they have other things to do. But so Freddie said, well, if I can't have my way, I think we should start a press ourselves. So we do. The university, the Freddie de Laguna Northern Books, academic press, yes, sir. So that's how we have 3 books going in there. Not easy because we have to make money on top of it, and Freddie wanted it to go to Native community with a discount. It was to make things available, she said. It was not to make money. Okay, the archives and so on, that we can talk. But then she also left piles of documents to be turned into books and to complete or to write. And she asked me to work on the Atna material and to turn that into a proper monograph. So I worked for about 2 years, and I came back with the manuscript. And she had one look at it and said, nah, start all over again. I said, why? Well, it's kind of, and then comes together. And I had done only the first 4 chapters. She said, because you forgot. Now we can talk. We have to get to the people first, and you have to figure out how the Atna people think. But Freddie, I'm not an Atna. She said, you have to make sure you are faithful to the statements, and those statements are in their voice. Go back to work. Okay. There was no gap in Freddie's research, and no gap in methodology. It was the same values that guided her writing, that guided the field, that guided attacking a river that's swollen because of the rain. Yeah, well, she was following the same values. Do you have a question for that? She never threw anything away. And she said, for instance, for Monsanto Elias, she used every statement she had received. And for the Atna, I'm supposed to do the same. So it's yeah. As far as I know, she's still with us, because she's still there, telling me what to do. Not only to me, but to my students. Now, the 2 things she gathered me into, and that became very important in the end, were 2 concepts that she felt were not sufficiently integrated into anthropology and were not sufficiently respected as working tools. A concept that has no use is not a concept. It has to be useful. The first one was the concept of worldview. Now, I've been working on the idea of worldview. I was already working on before that with worldview, and I think we kind of linked onto that one. But to her, artifacts were absolutely precious. But they were not precious in themselves. They were precious because they expressed something else. It's the something else I was supposed to reach. It's not the basket, it's the mind behind the basket. It's not the canoe. It's the mind, the knowledge behind the canoe. And what brings the canoe into I was going to say into harmony, into fitting with the whole rest of the human environment. To her culture, and that goes together with how she looked at and understood people. It had to do with the mind. And in that sense, I think she fitted really, really nicely with the Athabascan-speaking people and the Tlingit-speaking people, because I noticed, worldview seeker, that in those two linguistic groups, the world is, first of all, a mind, not a thing. It's a process. The other thing she asked me to do way early was to work out the matrilineal structure of the Dene people. She hated those genealogical charts, so I was supposed to figure them out and draw them. I needed walls most of the time. But she got me going on matrilineal society, and almost by chance, but not quite, because she was pushing. I ended up working with the Nabesna people, the Upper Tanana, and then some of the societies in Canada. In Canada, we call them Dene instead of Athabascan, but like the Wet'suwet'en in British Columbia, which in English people call Carrier, and the Sekani, that's for St. James. And then when I went to work for the National Museum of Man in Canada, that became the Museum of Civilization, I decided to work with the Tsimshian and the Gitkasan, also matrilineal. I had contact with the Navajo people. I had contact with, well, when I moved to Ottawa, with the Iroquoian Society, and now I have a colleague who is a Wyandot, which you would call Huron, I suppose. So I realized at one point I was dealing mostly with matrilineal societies. And in order to deal fairly with the people, with the Atna monograph, and with the whole context, because it always has to do with the context, then I had to figure out what matrilineality was all about. And that's where that project originated. In straight line from Freddie's request that I wrote about matrilineal societies from their point of view rather than from my own. That was informed mostly by anthropological theories. Okay. Working with the Gitkasan people in northern British Columbia, matrilineality was a topic that popped in regularly. And I was asked at one point to give a lecture to the college kids about matrilineality, because the 15, 16 years old didn't know that their society was matrilineal. They couldn't figure it out, and they had boyfriends and girlfriends in the wrong times. and the parents were concerned, and the whole system was going down. So investigating that, I realized that the Indian Affairs in Canada, the Department of Indian Affairs, that's part of the Ministry of Resources, strangely enough, had somehow erased matrilineality from the map. So today, a textbook on Aboriginal people in Canada. Even those textbooks written by Native people mention matrilineality only for the Iroquois. That's because we have the matrons sitting right there on the barricades and directing their warriors when there are political demands and land claims problems. At about the same time, I was invited to work with the Mosuo people in China. I had been going back and forth between Canada and China for a number of years. The Mosuo were special because they are completely matrilineal still today, after 2,000 years of pressure by the different Han Chinese Empire to eradicate matrilineality from their ranks. So they take their girls, they marry them to Han Chinese. They had mass education projects going on. The Mosuo are still matrilineal. And an important part of their population is not only matrilineal, but it still follows the old marriage custom, according to which there are no such thing as marriage. So instead of having two intermarrying clans, as you would have with the Copper River, or having to marry into the opposite side, as you would have in Yakutat, for instance, the Mosuo have gone all the way down. All the children belong to the mother side, mother's lineage, the mother household, and they stay there, male and female. The guys go roaming in the village and find girlfriends, sometimes steady, sometimes, most of the time temporary, and father children, but they are not their children socially. They don't even know. The women bring all the children home, and so you have grandmother and her brother leaving the household, and then people, and they're their children, and then the children of the daughters, and the children of the daughters' daughters, and the children of the daughters. So you'll see that. So that's my definition, very, very cursory definition of matrilineal society. A society with clans or lineages, because you have lines, matrilines, where one belongs to one mother's clans or matrilines. We have discovered now that matrilocal society, where the young couple goes and live with or near the mother, the wife's former homes, that matrilocality has the same effect as matrilineality. We now look at all over the world, and we don't have a matriarchal society or a society where women are in charge and men are below. You have plenty of societies where men are in charge and women are under. But even though the Iroquois, for instance, are beginning to use the term matriarchy, and they're not the only ones, they just want to make a point. But all the time, when you have a matrilineal society, you don't have just the women being chiefs. You have shared responsibility. Or something like the Iroquois, where only men can be chief, but only the women can vote for them. They vote for them, they train them, they choose them, okay? Now, we turned that into, my colleagues and I turned that, no, my colleague and the communities we work with turned that into a big project. So I'm going to talk about why bother about it, and why we shift from matrilineal kin groups to matrilineal culture, and then to the whole important question of language. Okay, so we have Freddie's with working with matrilineal kin groups and trying to figure it out. My own encounters with the Athabascan societies and the Gitkisan, the Tsimshian, and the Mosuo and other groups. And then we realized that matrilineality didn't figure anymore as a real concern in anthropology, even. It's gone from the official from the official description, and it's a thing of the past. But actually, there are still rules in Canada, for instance, that act against matrilineality. It's not something that's accepted. It's something that doesn't fit with the way supposedly modern societies are organized. But we had the Mosuo coming to us and said, help. We are being pressured. And what the official governments could not do, the tourism industry is doing. That means taking our daughters away from home. Because for a number of tourists, for a large number of tourism enterprises, matrilineality means free women. So you can guess the rest. Okay. In 2012, we traveled with a group of Gitkisan artists and a dance group from Kisan. And we went to a folk festival in Chengdu, which is the same province in Sichuan, where the matrilineal Mosuo people live, and they met. Okay, and there was an explosion at that point. The Gitkisan people are still matrilineal as far as the ceremonial events and the titles and the crests are concerned. But matrilineality itself is not the same value. For the Mosuo, it is a value they are trying to hang on to, because they say it's not just a question of address and social identity. It's a question of culture. Their entire worldview and their shamanic systems, because they have shamans there, hangs on matrilineality. If they lose that, they lose everything. So yes, we stood in awe at watching what was happening between those two groups of people. So excited at discovering that they were something they shared with two completely different cultural groups. So here are the Gitkisan and how they presented themselves. And here are their past reference, which is now being reenacted and is very part of life. And we are very much interested in how the matrilineal clan structure has been reinforced in spite of young people marrying the wrong way. They have put together a whole system of adoption, of ceremonial adoptions, so that the titles still go to the right person and the right line, and the children still get a father's side and a mother's side. And that's a Mosuo family, 3,000 meter high in the northern slope of Himalayas. Granduncle and grandma and their sons and daughters. You don't have the children there because they are playing in the fields. And this is the fire that links them with the ancestors. Every time you have a meal or something, you put some in the fire to connect. And that, the daughters. And around the whole lineage. The men used to be hunters and traders, and the women take care of the fields, the orchards, and making the potent alcohol that it served at every occasion, and the fire dance. Yeah, you have palm trees, but it's that's because you are way down south, right? But there's still plenty of snow in the winter. Now you may notice the way people stand. The I just love those people. But I wanted you to see the men. Some of them told me they pity the Han Chinese because they have to compete for women, and they don't. They don't have to fight. There's no need for competition. They have access to whatever they. They're happy in spite of the fact they are one of the poorest native group in China. Now, out of that first adventure, we constructed a first partnership between ourselves, our research group in Ottawa called Interculture, and then the International Research Institute for Material Culture in Southwestern University and Chengdu, which just popped together last month. We have an African matrilineality research group in Congo, and we have a number of communities already in touch with us and working in partnership with us. And because they are all involved, and because we have in mind about 40 communities more, those are the goals we put together. We have a website in construction, and the creation of an international matrilineal cultural research institute. That's done. That's done. And the Moswo people are involved and are pushing. And the first thing they want us to do is to help them with their language program, because Moswo was banned as a language, and they want to keep it going, and that means they have to find a writing system. They have to work on the writing system. In June of this year, we are going to have a workshop at the University of Ottawa, and the goal of which will be to prepare a collaborative research program for the study of society, the study and support, because the second goal is to have a network of societies, matrilineal societies of the world unite, type of thing. And then in October of this year, we are going to have a matrilineal conference, an international conference in Chengdu, at this university, with a visit to the Moswo. 2 days conference, 4 days visit to the Moswo, then 1 day for the pandas. The interesting thing in there is that the Swin University has put aside money for 40 trips, 40 scholars and or community representatives to travel to Chengdu. Travel and expenses and local expenses and everything. So if anybody is interested. Okay, and we also are putting together a photo display, a virtual exhibit, trying to get pictures. First because they need it in China. I'll tell you why. It's because the Moswo people want it to be known that they are not freaks of nature, that they are not the fossils, the cultural fossils are supposed to be. Today, when you travel to Lugu Lake, when you come into the Moswo Valley, there's a big sign that says basically, welcome to the fossil people. Because they are matrilineal, they are supposed to be back to the primitive hordes roaming through. Yeah, I know it's kind of bizarre, but even in Canada, I meet students who have that kind of idea in mind. Those are the old Marxist evolutionary theories. It's hard to get rid of stupidity. But the virtual exhibit will also serve for the website as a kind of census of those societies we meet. Because, remember I said there was not much done in academia? It means that most of those societies have not been described. We have some for which we don't know what language they speak. There is a big gap in the literature. Now, that's in collaboration with the Aboriginal communities. We are involved in collaborative research, not us studying them or them studying us, but a total effort where everybody communicates. So the website is an interactive website. That's how it's being constructed. And it's as an anthropological basis, but of course the multidisciplinary reach that Freddie wanted. Also, we are not considering matrilineage as kinship only, but we are looking at matrilineages as one expression of a value system or a worldview that goes way beyond that. And I'll come back to that. So from now on, we're talking about matrilineal cultures, and we established that in the past 2 workshops we had already. We take culture to be built on ways of thinking rather than artifacts, though artifacts have to be respected as expressions of and carrier of cultures. And worldview in China and in Africa have been replaced by the expression intangible culture. That's following UNESCO. Intangible culture, we looked at as a concept, and then we realized that it's not just ideas, it's not just art or dancing or storytelling. Intangible culture is that part of culture that cannot be accessed, reproduced, or transmitted without the intervention of living members of the community. Which means that we can tell UNESCO or the World Bank that if they want us to work, or anybody, us or anybody, to work on preserving cultural heritage, first of all, you have to allow the communities themselves, not just to survive, but to thrive. All right, that's the principles. Less than 100 such societies left in the world, all of them native people or indigenous people with indigenous rights. We know little about them. So far, we have 40 on our radar screen, but many of them in North America and in Alaska. You are one of the hot points of the whole thing. Okay, so there you have a list. I'm not going through it because you'll have the documents, but there's that's quite a sizable amount of people, and it's around the world, from Micronesia to Papua New Guinea to China to Africa. We found another one, 3 more in Taiwan, and as we go, we collect them, and then we write to them and say, do you want to be part of the group? North America, and a lot more, like the Crow people in the prairies and so on. Now, when you put them together, the first workshop we had, we were looking at all that, and then we realized there's no such thing as one model of a matrilineal society. Actually, they are all different. And sometimes when you have the trinket and the high inception side by side, you'll have to evolve some kind of translation of one kinship system into the next. So when you marry, you can figure out to whom the kids belong. But when you look at how people conceive, how people think about kinship, how people think about a person, how people think about an ancestor, then it's totally different. the Tsimshian people and the Haida people don't think in the same way. They can intermarry, yes, because we manage the rules so as to fit with each other. But it's a different worldview and a different way of looking at the world. So every matrilineal society is different. And when we realized that, we had to shift the angle of the research a bit. We were no longer looking for common grounds. We were looking for something else. So Iroquois, Atna, that's Canadian Dene, Tsimshian, Navajo people, Hopi people, Zuni. Okay, the one thing people share though is the history. Not just with the European, but also with other forms of colonialism, Chinese colonialism, for instance, or what's happening in India, what's happening in Indonesia. They all promote male-headed nuclear families as the idea. And some research has been done in that. It's because male-headed nuclear families, small families, are more amenable to obeying the state. And they have less flexibility because you don't have that much help. In Christian, Islamic, Chinese, Hindu, and other great religions also put women as wife and domesticity, and men as head of the household. While in many societies, in fact, the women are head of the household and the men as head of the village or whatever. But it doesn't fit with reality, but it fits with the ideologies. The state names males as household heads so that women can't inherit and so on, with strange consequences, for instance, with the Tsimshian. When land, crest, and so on are passed in a female line, but native identity, official native identity, is passed through the males. Or trap lines are inherited from father to son. So you have all those twists in the social fabric. Extended family dwelling, which are usually the rules in matrilineal societies, I don't know why, but that's the fact, have been replaced by nuclear family housing systematically. By missionaries, Buddhist missionaries as well as Christian ones. And a third conclusion, okay, why should we bother about matrilineal societies? Well, they are different. They may be different culturally and linguistically, but they are more successful than the others. We haven't tested that scientifically yet. Freddie would. But Peggy Sunday has done a statistical research worldwide, and especially for Africa. And women's health is better, children's health is better, and women are treated better. Aggression and violence, the rate of rape in matrilineal society is still there, but it's way below the one you have in patrilineal or patriarchal societies. But also the rate of male violence between brothers and uncles or fathers, or between the men in the village. Governance is also way better. It may have something to do with the fact that in many matrilineal societies, the women do the accounting. The men do the traveling and the trading and so on, with the younger women, but the older women are in charge of the finances. But also, and that's Peggy Sunday. Peggy is a magnificent woman. She works in Indonesia, in Sumatra, with the Minangkabau people. Long houses, a little bit like the Tlingit. Cooperation within and between families is high. And she writes, if we pay attention to our matrilineal society, think about power and control in terms of cooperation or consensus, we will understand how they survive and succeed economically and culturally. Matrilineal society, for one reason or the other, have a way of fitting together that is more efficient than the patrilineal societies, where you have a lot of competition between the houses and between the men. Social position of women is much higher, with more autonomy and more resources for both families and communities. One of the things we are now working on.
Before you move on,
Yes.
go back to that page. Is this conclusion, is that something for history?
That has been established.
That has been established for where?
If you take statistics for Africa and Asia, we still have to work the statistics for the world, but it's not easy because material societies have not yet been completely identified. But yes, and Peggy Sunday, if you remember her name, or I can send you the references. Yes, she did the research. Another thing she noticed, in Africa, it doesn't concern you that much, but in Africa, matrilineal societies do not have female circumcision. Yes. Yes.
Just continuing on that question, has there been any study on the Tlingit and Atna, specific to the lower rates of aggression?
No, we don't
Because,
have.
as we know, Alaska Natives, Alaska in general as a state suffers from one of the highest rates of domestic violence.
Yes, the same thing in Native Canada, and suicide rates for the young people. But it's still lower than the ones you have for patrilineal societies. We have the rates in general, but we don't have rates that differentiate between the matrilineal societies and the ones that have other systems. Also, we don't have the rates distinguishing between societies with lineages and clans versus societies with no clans, and they all matter. I can take a look at that. Yeah. Now, I told you before, and that continued the question. One of the things we've done was to look in. Could we show that matrilineality was not just kinship, that it has something to do with a vision of the world? So I had several. I'm getting as bossy as Freddie. Some of my colleagues and students, I asked them to go and look in the myths, in the mythology of societies, and we found that where is it? That's our first conclusions. To everybody's surprise, in matrilineal societies, in native matrilineal society in Canada, compared to the non-matrilineal societies, in the matrilineal society, we have female heroes, and they go on quests by themselves, and and there's no mention of rape in the myth, and the Greek mythology is full of it. But not among the Egyptians, amongst the Iroquois, the Haida, the Athabasca. No, they do their own, and they are named. They are not somebody's mother or somebody's wife, okay? Though you have plenty of somebody's husband and somebody's brother. In the stories they have names. And I find that very interesting. When the men go on a quest, they come back with a treasure, or they come back with a princess, or a girl, and they come back with hunting territories, or they come back with quest. When the women go on a quest, they come back with a quest, yes, but they also come back with babies, across the board. And they start a new. That's Iroquois Sky Woman. But before she becomes Sky Woman and falls onto us, she has a long, long adventures in the realms of the ball when she meets all kind of people and collects power and collects knowledge. That's why her husband threw her through the hole, because he couldn't control her anymore. She was in charge. Okay. And we were not interested in the societies, not that much interested in societies that were failing, but we were interested in comparing societies that are managing to survive, okay? And if we're interested later on, we can talk about what we found about the societies. But as a rule, they have language programs. Language is really one of the keys. And language, because language is two things. Language allows you to communicate between generations, but it also allows you to domesticate the stuff that comes from outside. I'll give you an example, okay? But it comes from a non-matrilineal society, but strongly matrilineal. When the Inuit in Canada, okay, learn to fly helicopters, every part of the helicopter has an Inuit name. The entire Eskimo language sucks in everything that comes from the south and transforms it into an Eskimo object, an Eskimo ID, an Eskimo process. See? Also, as you've seen with the myth, when you have a story about raven, in English, it's a he. When you have a story about raven, an Athabascan story about raven, in an Athabascan language, it's a e. It's not a she, it's not a he, it's in between, it's both. And we have that in a number of the Canadian languages as well. Okay, it matters. And kinship terms, but also all the terms referring to what is a woman, who is a trader, not a he, very often they are she, and so on. So language is there. Language also carries the worldview. Cultural transmission, in the successful communities, cultural transmission is not just in the hands of the elders with selective access, it's in the hands of the young people as well. Now, that asks for courage to put a program in the hands of 20 years old or 15 years old. But it works. Now, the third one, people say, oh, but you cannot use computers or you cannot use the internet for that because it goes against the culture and so on. But this is ridiculous because it equates culture with things, and it has nothing to do with things. You can drive a tractor in an Athabascan way. You can run a hospital with from an Egyptian perspective. It's all how you do it. One of the things I was noticing is when we're talking about establishing a library in Yakutat with Freddie's books. That's one of the things we could do. But to put the library together with the seniors' home, now that's a good idea. Okay, but you don't put it in some place where it's restricted access and where you have to show who you are in order to get in. No, you put it together with the elders. It's a repository of knowledge. See, so we need new ways of thinking, but definitely in Congo, for instance, we are thinking of equipping, well, we're already doing that in China. You equip all the members of the communities with iPads and cell phones and so on, and you watch what's happening, and you develop language programs to fit in. So we have fantastic tools now, and they might just as well be used. Instead of being used to enforce a schedule, or to control a community. You can use you can use them to communicate. Okay, that's the end. It started as a cross-cultural encounter, okay? And it's continuing as a cross-cultural encounter between people, between cultures. That's one Gitkesan young dancer dancing in the streets in Chengdu. Now, he was part of a large group of 14 members. What was interesting is when they were facing literally thousands of people, they went into trance. And they danced as they had never danced before, because they now have the audience to communicate who they are. Okay? Not just to tourists, but to a whole city. Now, to continue the same encounter, this is a man from Chengdu working with the Mosuo project. And he is in Ottawa in the Museum of Civilization by the carving, the plaster cast of a bronze carving by Bill Reed. And awed by it. See, the art doesn't lie. So when we start our encounters, we try to introduce first the art, and then the way people move, and the dancing, and then the myth, when we get into the language. And after that, we can start working. But we have to start with what matters, right? The stuff where you can get to figure out how different the other is and accept that difference. But that was matrilineal. In different ways. But something is there. So thank you very much. Now you can. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, good. Do you have, are there any questions for?
I have a question, Doctor.
Yes.
You talked earlier about certain cultures in China or Africa that clan system and
Yeah.
the matrilineal.
No.
When you're talking about matrilineal, it's really confusing compared to the clinic of matrilineal, because it sounded like to me you said matrilineal is all the way down to the woman's side no matter what, but the men changes of adoption to make sure that...
No, that's for the Tsimshian. The Tsimshian people have to maintain their clans system.
Okay, underneath the
Just
adoption.
for the Tsimshian.
But if you're on matrilineal, it only stays on the woman's side, so the men are adopted to correct it.
No, you can also have a woman adopted. It goes both ways for the Tsimshian.
Well, correction, if you're doing matrilineal, it follows on your mother's side.
Yeah.
Your son becomes your mother, but when he's married, he already has a clan, so he has to go look for, let's say, a raven has to go look for an eagle.
Yes.
See what I'm saying?
Yes.
If you're being adopted,
Okay.
that means you're just going to be
okay,
running around in the village looking for a raven.
Okay. Let's assume your nephew, okay, a classificatory nephew, somebody you call a nephew, wants to marry somebody you call a daughter.
Illegal.
Exactly, but young people do it. So how are you going to solve that? You can push them out of the society, but for the Tsimshian people, I'm not to think it. So those are the Gitkesan people dealing with the situation today. So what happens? Well, you got pushed out.
But when is it acceptable then? See, if you're talking about a culture, you're ruling the culture to the point of not knowing your clan system. And if you stray away from the clan system of adoption, that means it doesn't correct itself in the next generation or the second generation.
Yes,
or the third generation.
but in the Simpson kinship system, the possibility of adoption has been there from the beginning. Because you have people coming from the outside. And if, as an outsider, you don't have a father's side or a mother's side. You marry somebody in and you become the in-law.
But if you're talking about cultural and thinking
yes,
culturally,
yes,
what's really important then is thinking culturally on your matrilineal side. So how could you keep on straying away from it?
Because you have many different kinds of matrilineality. If you are in the Simpson community, you have the obligation to marry on your father's side. Okay? Same thing with the Atna. You have the obligation to marry somebody on your father's side. You end up with two clans intermarrying. Okay? I have to marry on my father's side, but my boyfriend has to marry on his father's side too, which happens to be my mother's. So, okay?
So you become your own uncle and you become your own grandfather then.
Your maternal uncle is your uncle, but your paternal uncle is somebody different. Is your father, your little father in Atna.
I might just add that I think what's happening is that when, well, in Tlingit society, going back to the worldview, you go back, and our worldview would be governed by wuchyak. Wuchyak, you have to have balance, social and spiritual balance. And so we definitely have a matrilineal society. But when we began to have changes in our society, and then you begin to have double eagle, double raven marriages, what happened was that in the earlier period, it depended on the status of a person. So you would have somebody, let's say 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that was a raven, and he married another raven. And what would happen at that point in time was that raven would be adopted into an eagle.
That's it.
But right now, what's happening in our society is that even though the elders don't like double eagle and double raven marriages, it's happening. And what we need to do is maybe even quantify where we see it's happening. Double eagle, double raven marriages are happening. But what we're moving away from is the adoption of one of the spouses. And we're continuing our matrilineage, but we're not requiring that that spouse be adopted into another clan.
But by doing so, it weakens the system.
Yeah. So it's
For the Gitkasan,
Yeah.
it actually strengthens it, because now when they get married, they have to know what they are. And if they're not the right kind, you have to switch, and then you have to learn the myths and the stories and sort of a new identity. And so you are good. It's a different strategy.
That's where ours is, it's linked to the clans. So the lineage is really important, the matrilineage, but it also for us includes the moiety system and the
Yes,
clans.
and
So
if-
they're interrelated.
Yes, and if you were on the Atna, for instance, then you have to be really careful, because the moiety is sacred. Except they're called moieties, but there are 3 of them. So you have same thing with the Upper Tanana. You have 2 moieties officially, but you don't have a name for the moieties. The moieties is not even the third side. You are always the moiety of somebody. And so when you have those funny marriages, you get not adopted, but identified with the other side, the third side. So you end up as a Dikayu. And the system, every society is different, and every society works out its own rules. And it's not just here. It's among in the Sahara with the tribes. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do. That's right. And if you have this, like the Minangkabau people, the poor thing, they have Islam being imposed on them from the outside. So and it's a patriarchal system. And here they have to figure out, so how are we going to get our children to marry the proper way? How are we going to get to protect the land? Because for them, the land is absolutely sacred. And you have to figure out the heritage rules, because the imam, the Muslim imam, is going to push you in one way, but you have to figure out how to bend the whole thing so that you continue your own.
In the societies that you looked at where it's a matrilineage,
Yes.
is it a moiety system
Some,
and clan?
most of them, no, I would say about a third of them have moiety system attached to them. Many of them do not, and certainly the most will do not.
But do they also have clans?
Yes. Well, no. Some of them have clans, some of them have just lineages, that is, it stops with the living.
That would be the variable, I guess, for us, is
Yes.
with the clans.
But technically, matrilineality, matrilineal societies have to do with other lineages or clans. But actually, people don't follow the anthropological definition at all. And you have all kinds of other things. So we are discovering a number of societies where people go and live with the parents of the bride. And so you end up with a de facto matrilineal lineage, but it has no name and no ceremonial functions.
See, in our society, it's different. The woman would have to move away from the house.
That's right.
To her own house.
That's
not
right.
move from her husband's house. So I think this is going to be a good research project, okay? We should do it. Because really, I mean, I think that in our society, I mean, we still have a very viable, culture. We've had some dramatic changes, and right now we're kind of in a recovery mode from those changes
Yes.
and taking charge of it again.
Yes.
So I think
It has a lot to do. Okay, we haven't mentioned that, but it's important. When you deal with matrilineal society, de facto matrilineal, it means, okay, you have to watch the people who go and live with their uncles versus the people who go and live with the mothers. In those matrilineal societies where the women can at least go back home to their mothers and aunts and sisters when they give birth, okay, it means that you have a contact that's maintained between the girl and her family. It also means that usually the women marry later. Okay, but the girl will then stay in touch with her home family, her mothers, and all that female knowledge that's being transmitted by the grandparents, never forget the grandparents, and the grandmothers. Okay, compare that with a patrilineal society, and I did live in one, and I studied with several, in Africa, in China, especially. In a patrilineal society or patriarchal society, because there are many of them, the girls are being shipped from their birth home to the husband's home, which is in fact the mother-in-law and the father-in-law's home. They won't learn from their mother-in-law because mother-in-laws in general don't care much for their daughter-in-law and boss them mercilessly, and she is in fact the slave to the whole house until she gets a son. Yeah. So the girl moves out, she is 12, 13, okay? She's done with her learning. From that point on, she has to survive with what she has learned up to that point, and she has to glean whatever she can from the neighbors, from the women she meets, but she's not mobile. She doesn't have the right to travel. She is attached to the house. Okay? The men keep on moving everywhere they want, so they have access to their whole family. But the girls are finished with their official learning. They'll transmit to their daughter what they've regained, what they kept alive. So from generation to generation, the transmission of cultural heritage, of knowledge, is cut short. Okay? It's tough. And they have short lives. We haven't got that in statistics, but the rate of the length of life for the women in our society is much lower. The men don't care. An additional problem is that the older men are going to keep all the women to themselves, so that you have a great deal of antagonism between the sons and the fathers, and the sons and the older generation. So it's you have happy culture, right, in a way, because the women are kept in the childhood part of it. When you have a matrilineal society where the women have access to their family, they have access to the whole transgenerational thing, and they learn from their grandmothers, which means they have a solid access to stories, to values, to art. Okay? The men in the matrilineal societies keep their mobility. So they now have access, and that's certainly true for all of the Athabascan people. They have access to both their own territory, their own story. They also have access to their wives, because the relationship between the in-law and the son are usually much better than between the mother-in-law and the son and the daughter-in-law. So you end up with a society in which the men have an enriched cultural reach, and the women also have a full-size culture. And you have an additional advantage in matrilineal societies, that men and women have access to the same stories. It's shared culture. We have cultures in the world, patrilineal culture, where women speak one language and men another. Okay? But not in matrilineal societies. It's impossible because they live together. So if you are talking about cultural heritage, you are much better off in a matrilineal society. But that hasn't been that has been alluded to and mentioned and concluded, but it hasn't been. We haven't done the research yet. To prove that it is indeed so, but that's what the data seems to suggest.
Well, thank you. This is great. I think we need another seminar.